Hi everyone, welcome to week 7's mini lecture. This week we're going to go over the family life in this video, Nicholas and Alexandra's family life. The documentary should cover most everything else having to do with his rule, just hitting the high marks. And you'll sort of get a bit more background as to why he may have made these decisions and going over the family life in this lecture. So let's first start out with the family tree. So what you're going to see is a strong relation between a lot of the royal families in Europe, and that's thanks to Queen Victoria, right? She had a lot of children, and she married those children off into every royal family that ever was in Europe. So Alexander's mother was married to royalty in Germany. Uh, there was another daughter of Victoria who was married off, I believe it was Vicky, was married off to the King of Germany, hence Alexandra and Wilhelm, Kaiser Wilhelm, are first cousins. And then you, of course, have the heir to the English throne, George IV, was first cousins with them, but then also first cousins with Nicholas II. And George IV's father, of course, was the son of Victoria, but he married a Danish princess. And then the Danish princess had a sister who married Tsar Alexander III of Russia. So that's where you have the connection. So to clear that for everyone, Nicholas and Alexandra shared first cousins, but they were not first cousins themselves. Just like Nicholas, George IV, and Wilhelm were all first cousins, but only George and Wilhelm were related by blood, whereas Nicholas was related through his marriage to Alexandra to Wilhelm. It's confusing, I know. But let's move on. Next, I want to talk about Nicholas and Alexandra's personalities, because that played a lot into their relationship and how they chose to rule Russia, and how they chose have an outlook on life. So first, let's talk about Nicholas. Nicholas was fun-loving, but he was also mature. When he took the throne at 26, it absolutely terrified him, and that is for good reason. He had no idea what he was doing. And part of that is because he just didn't have the sense of a ruler in that respect. It's always said of Nicholas that he would have been a much better ruler of England than he was of Russia. Because in England, there's a parliament. And in Russia, it's a strict autocracy, right? What Nicholas said went. There was nothing else to that. And Nicholas was not ready for that type of pressure. And he even wrote, when his father died, he wrote in his diary, I am not ready. I am not prepared. I've not been prepared for this. It's not that Nicholas didn't have any schooling, but his father didn't really take time to teach him the things that came with being the ruler. Mainly because his father didn't think Nicholas would become ruler so soon. Nicholas's father was only 49 when he died. That's pretty young. And so Nicholas was 26, unprepared. His brother Michael was much more suited for the throne, honestly. But God has a plan, right? So he was very mature, fun-loving. There are pictures of him planking on one of his Russian cousins' backs. And when I say planking, I mean, yes, balancing on his stomach on his back. It's a funny picture, but should an adult really be doing that? Or ruler of Russia? Now go to Alexandra, who is almost the complete opposite of Nicholas. So it's interesting that they make such a good couple. Alexandra is quiet, she's reserved, she's ultra religious, and Nicholas is very religious as well, don't get me wrong. But she is ultra religious. Her religion is what was keeping her from marrying Nicholas. One of the things keeping her from marrying Nicholas sooner than they did, because she was Lutheran. She was raised Lutheran because she was German. And to marry Nicholas, she would have had to convert to Russian Orthodoxy, and that is a stark those are two are stark contrasts to each other, like day and night. And so she wasn't going to do it, because a lot of people told her, oh, you don't have to do it, you don't really have to convert, you just have to act like you converted, basically put on the show. And she wasn't going to do that. To her, that was like heresy. And so if she was going to convert to Russian Orthodoxy, it was going to be a complete conversion. And eventually she did. And she had a complete, true conversion, and she became more Russian than the Russians, as they say. And of course, there can be debate, in the Christian field of, can you really convert to another form of Christianity? But all I can say is that she was very devout. When, as an example, when the White Army went into the house of special use, which is where the family was killed, and they were looking for the family, who of course wasn't there, they found Alexandra's Bible, and her Bible was filled with notes, highlighted, underlined passages, notes on things. She, she, that's what she did in her last moments, in her last days. And in the days of captivity, she was just absorbed in her Bible. And they instilled this into their children as well. Under Nicholas, more churches were built in Russia than under any other czar before him. And part of me wonders, since this is a lecture, I'm going to sort of give my opinion a little bit. Part of me wonders if her Lutheran faith carried over into Orthodox faith, and that helped her maintain that strength of faith, sort of that more Protestant, strong faith base. But that's just sort of my wonderings. But back to their personalities. She was very shy, so she didn't really conform to Russian court life. She was raised by Victoria because her mother and sister died when she was very young, so she was raised by Queen Victoria. And so she was about as English Victorian as you could get. They had nice things, but it wasn't the opulent Russian court where you walk in and everything is marble and gold. She was taken aback and overwhelmed, and understandably. She also didn't know Russian. She didn't really know the language of the court, which was French at the time, ironically. The noble women made fun of her behind her back, and so it got to the point where she started to excuse herself for headaches. She would claim she didn't feel well, so she would leave parties early. My idea is that she used this as a coping mechanism. And she really did have some illnesses. She did have scoliosis, and that only got worse as she got older, because she had 5 kids, about 2 years apart each, sometimes 3, but that did have an effect on her back health. But in terms of her heart hurting or her, head hurting, a lot of people think was a bit more hypochondriac type symptoms, but I think she used them as a coping mechanism to deal with this life that she was not used to. A lot of people say that she and Nicholas would have been much better rulers of England, and that's because it was a parliamentary system and it wasn't a strict autocracy, and so it wasn't set on their heads as it would have been set on their heads directly. And of course, as life went on, they had a very happy marriage. They were very loving. They loved each other until the day they died. And they had children. They had 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. From oldest to youngest, I can name them off for you. There's Olga Romanova, Tatiana Romanova, Maria Romanova, and Anastasia Romanova. And then, of course, you had Alexei Romanov. In case you're wondering why the is at the end of Romanov for the women, that's just the feminine form of the name in Russian. Now, their daughters, they loved their daughters so incredibly much, but it was not a son, and there needed to be a son to rule Russia, because as we know, Catherine the Great was the last woman to rule Russia. And because she was horrible to her son, he outlawed it. He was like, no woman's ever going to be empress again. So they waited and they waited, and they finally got their son, Alexei, they had prayed for. But he had hemophilia. And of course, this then comes from Queen Victoria as well. It was passed from Victoria to Alexandra's mother, and then to Alexandra, who then passed it to her son, and it only is active in males. So this was a problem for the family, right? Because finally you waited after 4 daughters and you have this son, but he may not even survive to be 16. The slightest bump, the slightest bruise, slightest cut could end in death for him. Somehow he survived his childhood, and of course we all know who came to the rescue at some point, and that was Grigory Rasputin, right? Now, he and Alexandra had a very unique relationship. It wasn't so much, it got spun as like an affair type relationship, but they never had an affair. Primary documents show that she was devout to Nicholas her entire life. She loved him with all of her being, and and Nicholas loved her. Nicholas never worried. The other members of the Romanov family worried. They worried about Rasputin's influence on the family. They worried about Rasputin being so close to those young girls, especially the grandmother. Nicholas's mother did not like it. And she tried to talk with Nicholas and was like, why are you letting him be in the room with these girls alone? Why are you doing this? And looking back and, from an outside distance, we can see like, wow, this guy was a little freaky. And just looking at his picture, there's something wrong with him. And I'll get into what I think was wrong with him in a second. But to Nicholas and Alexandra, he was the saving grace, especially Alexandra. She had put so much pressure on herself to produce a son, and she'd done her one duty as the empress. And then he has hemophilia and he can die. And here comes this mystic monk from the Orthodox faith which Alexandra is so devout to. And he's like, oh, I can heal your son. And he's able to stop the bleeding. No one knows how he did it still. No one was allowed in the room with him when he did it, and he could heal him over the phone. No one has any idea how he did it. But Alexandra was so thankful that she didn't think about anything else. She just wanted him there to heal her son and save the line. Well, eventually, other members of the Romanov family decided enough's enough. He's having too much influence over Nicholas and Alexandra, giving advice on things that he shouldn't be giving advice on. And so some of Nicholas's cousins killed him. Theoretically. They shot him several times, shot him in the head, and they thought he was dead and dumped him in the river. Well, once his body was recovered and the autopsy was done, it was shown that he didn't die from the gunshot wound to the head. He actually died from drowning. And in my opinion, that was because he was possessed by a demon, right? And I feel like I can say that to you all since this is a Liberty University class, but there was something wrong with that man. So once he died in December of 1916. March of 1917, Romanovs are overthrown. And what's really creepy is Rasputin had said, hey, if anything ever happens to me, to Nicholas, he said this, if anything ever happens to me, your children and family are going to die. And he said something similar to Alexandra. And it was about about 3 to 4 months later, depending on which calendar you look at, that the Romanovs were overthrown. And so let's talk about that for a minute. I don't have much longer with you guys, but they were overthrown in what's been known as the February Revolution, and on the new calendar it's March. Russia was always behind on switching calendars. So they were overthrown. The White Army held them under house arrest for a while, mainly for their own protection. They were supposed to be going out to England. There was an offer by England to bring them over to have asylum, but then by Parliament, by the way. But then George IV, Nicholas's first cousin and best friend, one of his closest friends, was like, no. He said no, because he worried that bringing them over somehow would attach his name to Bolshevism, and that would cause the people of England to revolt, and he would lose his throne. He never spoke about not letting them come over after their deaths. He just said it was a shame what happened to the children and Nicholas and Alexandra. But then, of course, the Red Army takes over in Red October, right? The October Revolution. And they take the family out to Siberia somewhere, to Ekaterinburg. And then in Ekaterinburg is where the family dies, in a house of special use is the title of it. They were mowed down in gunfire. They were told that they were going to be posing for a picture. Not the case. They shot them dead. And then they disposed of the bodies. They tried several methods. They threw them in a mine shaft, didn't work. Poured acid on the bodies, didn't work. Finally, they burned them, and then they buried them. And they weren't rediscovered until the 1970s, but the man who rediscovered them kept quiet because he did not want the Soviet government to find out what he had found. And in the 1990s, they were finally rediscovered, but 2 bodies were missing. And then in about, I think it was 2007, 2 more bodies were found near the original burial plots. It's believed that those were Alexei and Maria that were there, and also there were servants who were killed with them. It was a very brutal murder. And now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Romanov family was made saints. They were made saints in the Russian Orthodox Church. Now, it wasn't just that family, that one unit of the family that died. Nicholas's brother Michael was killed by the Bolsheviks. I mean, Bolsheviks wiped out anyone that they could find that could lay claim to the Russian throne and unite the White Army behind them. And so that is how the Russian Romanovs empire fell. It's a sad story. And there isn't necessarily really a happy ending, other than that we know their story and we can tell it. But other than that, I hope you all enjoyed this lecture, and I hope you enjoy the video and the readings as well.